Okay, so I've been having a little bit of fun with these record tags. This is going to be the second one, and I decided to do my own this time. So if you feel inclined to do this, I've left all of the prompts down below. And for those of you that don't know, a record tag is just a series of, I chose 20 prompts to then go into the record collection that I have and showcase an album that's based off of that prompt. And this has been a lot of fun. And I've left the hashtag of notes record prompt, or I guess, sorry, notes record tag, so that I can see everybody else's response. So yeah, I'm doing a little bit more of these kind of like vinyl community things because I really love talking about my collection. I'm pretty proud of it. So yeah, let's start off with the 20 that I have. I've reached out to you because I wanted you guys to bring as much in this as I did. So I reached out to Twitter, I reached out to Facebook. If you're not following me on both of those, go ahead and do so that you can get involved as well. And I just said, what kind of records do you want to see me showcase within this little record tag thing? So the first one is show an album that you got for free. Bonus points if it was from the band. And I know that I'm at a pretty big advantage on this one because I've been sent a number of records from bands themselves. And this one is one of my favorites. This is the Bloody Millard Realm. I've really loved this. This is kind of like a this kind of new wave of metal that we've seen in the past 5 years that's very post-rock and shoegaze in expression with a brilliant expression of metal that's kind of rounding this all off. This is a great one. The boys sent me the album, and it's actually a red album as well. So the vinyl itself is a nice blood red, which kind of matches the name of the Bloody Millard. So yeah, really, really liked it. Hats off to you boys, and thank you so much for sending me this record. It's great. Next up is a Rainy Day album, and this has been great for the past week, and I think it's going to continue for the next couple of days, because here it has been pouring rain pretty much every day for the past, as I mentioned, a week. So what better album to listen to on a rainy day than In Rainbows from Radiohead? I first really listened to this on very deep rainy days, and every time it's really rainy or atmospheric or anything like that, I always put this one on. I have a number of other albums that I would probably go to first, but this is the only one that I have in record format. So I wanted to showcase this. This is one of my favorite Radiohead albums. It's in my top 3 albums from them because it's my 3rd favorite album from them. And I think it really showcased that even though this is one of their later albums, they still have it in them to produce such great bops. My favorite track on here is Jigsaw Falling Into Place, but all the tracks off of this album is just stellar. Great kind of post-rock stuff. And post-rock in like a post-rock expression rather than post-rock in like the explosions in the sky and Godspeed type of thing. Okay, moving on to number 3. An album that has grown on you. This is an album that originally you did not like and then later on you grew to love. And I could not think of a better album than this one here. This is Fortress from Protest the Hero. And I actually have to keep, this is one of the few that I keep in a sleeve. I usually don't use sleeves. I'm just not a big fan of them. I always figure that I keep pretty good care of my records, so I never really need one. But this is one because I can't fit the way that they manufactured this one. I can't fit the actual record itself into the gatefold. It's too tight. So every time I try, it's always like trying to thread a needle. We're trying to get this guy into the actual album itself. So I always just kind of put it right in between and then put it into the gatefold. Or into the sleeve there. But I love the gatefold, the picture there of the fortress. When I first heard this back when it first came out, a friend of mine was like, oh, if you love progressive metal, you're going to love these guys. And I just did not get into it. It was too heavy, too thrashy. I didn't like it at all. And then when I moved to Toronto, I needed something with a little bit more teeth, and I just fell into this album hard. I love the actual vinyl itself. You know, it's got that blue on black. Very, very beautiful. And this is an album that, honestly, the more I listen to it, the more I love it. I think it's their best work. Even though a lot of people love their first one, I still love this one. And yeah, it's one that I'm very pleased to have it in my collection. I think it's their special edition, like 10-year anniversary thing. And it is, as I mentioned, one of the few that I actually keep in a sleeve because I don't want the record just to kind of fly around. So I'll put that back in later on. All right. From there, number 4, an album that has a woman member in the band who doesn't sing. This was one of my own questions because this one actually stemmed off of the Prague tag, the Prague 2021 tag, where it was an album that had a woman member, and I wanted to make it a little bit more difficult, which is a woman member who doesn't sing, because most of the time when there's a woman in the band, she's singing, and I wanted to have just a musicianship, and this one was really tough. I have to admit, this was really tough. I can only think of one, and that is a new addition to the Baroness catalog, which is Baroness Gold and Grey. The lead guitarist on this one, it's the new guitarist, and her name is Gina Gleason. Her guitar work on here, now she does have a little bit of vocals on here, but it's not the main one, and she doesn't use them all that often, so I'm going to let it slide just because I needed something. But yeah, Gina being on this album as one of the main guitarists, great addition to the band, and really helped round out this album. Not their best album, but it's one, again, kind of like the Protest the Hero one that's grown on me. Okay, number 5, a Cottage vibe album. This is an album that, I mean, for me, it's one that I listen to whenever I'm up at the family cottage, but this could be anything that kind of fits the cottage core, kind of like countryside type of an album. And this is an album that I listen to almost exclusively up at the family cottage. This is one that's on all the time whenever it's summer, and that is Supertramp's Crisis What Crisis. Growing up, the classic rock station within the area was always playing, and when it wasn't, it was most likely because Supertramp Crisis What Crisis was on the record. I love this one. This is one of my favorite Supertramp albums. My favorite still is Crime of the Century. But Crisis What Crisis is a very close second, and it has some of their biggest underappreciated and hidden gems on there. I love The Meaning, the second last track, even Sister Moonshine. I mean, all of these are so good. Another Man's Woman, Lady, Poor Boy. They're just, all their tracks on here are just so good. So this is my Cottage album. I listen to it all the time whenever I'm up at the cottage. All right, number 6, an album that has Mike Portnoy on drums, bonus points if it is not Dream Theater. So this one was a little, again, easy. I have a lot of Dream Theater albums, but again, I wanted to make it a little bit different by having it not be a Dream Theater album. So I picked up A Similitude of a Dream from the Neil Morse Band. I actually picked this up when I saw them perform this live. I think that was the third live show that I saw with Mike Portnoy on drums. A fantastic album. Probably my favorite work from Neil Morse. I mean, Mike Portnoy has gone on the record to say that this is one of his favorite albums he's ever worked on. He said that it could, stand the test of time as like Tommy and all those like big concept albums. I'm not sure if it would quite measure up to those, but this is a fantastic work. As I mentioned, my favorite Neil Morse Band album, my favorite Neil Morse project, if I'm being perfectly honest. I love this album, and it just keeps giving back to me. All right, number 7, a side project album. So this one in the prog sphere is pretty easy, as a lot of artists have a plethora of side projects. I could go with anything from like No Man or Storm Corrosion, and that's just looking at, Steven Wilson's side projects. But I decided for one of my favorite albums from last year, and that is Lunatic Soul Through Shaded Woods. This is Martin Dudad's side project, his Lunatic Soul. I love this album. This album, I kept saying it when I was doing my my year-end review. This one blew me away. Like, I could not believe the amount of sounds that was coming out of this. Even though it's much more of an acoustic set, it still hits hard. So one of my favorite albums from last year, if you haven't heard it already, definitely do so. I think this is Lunatic Soul's best work, and one of Martin's best projects. Okay. Next one, number 8, the first album you purchased with your own money. Now, this was a little bit difficult for me because I honestly couldn't remember which one was the first one that I bought with my own money. I mean, I bought a bunch of CDs and tapes when I was younger, so I can remember like the first one that I bought with my own money for a CD was either the Sabrina the Teenage Witch soundtrack or Much Dance 2001. And I believe my first tape that I bought with my own money was Uriah Heep's The Raging Silence. But I do very clearly remember the first new album that I got with my own money in terms of a record. So this was a record that came out that year that was pressed to a record. And that was actually my introduction to Opeth with Opeth's Watershed. This is the first pressing of Opeth's Watershed. It's one of my favorite albums in my collection. It's one of my darling. And I remember seeing it at HMV when it was still open. And I remember like hearing about Opeth, and I hadn't really gotten into them. I believe this was 2008 when it was first released. And so records weren't as prolific as they were nowadays. Like this is over 10 years now where, you know, vinyls and records have really come back. At this time, it was mainly just CDs. So when I saw that there was a record behind the counter, I was like, yes, I'll take it. And to help like promote it, you also got the CD. So this was the same price as the CD, and you just happened to also get the records with them. So this turned me on to Opeth. I was scared out of my mind when I was first listening to it, but I clearly remember this was the first new album that I got. After that, my collections exploded from there, but I no longer had to rely on either used records or inheriting them from my parents. Okay, number 9, a nostalgic album. This, again, I could have chosen so many different albums on here, but I wanted to really keep it to my childhood, you know, my growing up, because a lot of this I inherited from my parents, specifically my dad. And so I could have put, you know, Klaatu or the Beatles or Pink Floyd, but I felt like those were inherited and I wanted something that was very uniquely and specifically mine. So I brought one of my favorite albums from my childhood, Spice Girls' Spice World. Yes, I love the Spice Girls. I was a closeted Spice Girls fan when I was growing up. I had to kind of listen to them in private because if I listened to them externally, I would get viciously mocked because childhood in a suburban Canadian town is great. But I just love a lot of these tracks. I mean, Spice Up Your Life and Stop are staples. And if you can't dance to the Stop movements, then what are you doing with your life? The movie itself that this is from is hysterical. Meatloaf is in it, and he is brilliant. So yeah, great album, and one that I love to listen to quite on repeat. I'm trying to find their first album to kind of complete my collection, because it's just really their first 2 albums. So that's a nostalgic album from me. Okay, we are now at the halfway point with number 10, an album you got at a concert. And again, I got a lot of albums from different concerts. I mean, The Similitude of a Dream was one that I got at a concert, but this was one of the first albums that I got at a concert, and one that I love to have in my collection. It's starting to see some little bit of wear and tear. Oh well. And that is Haken's Restoration. I got this at my first Haken concert, their first U.S. or I guess North American tour. They had Next to None opening up for them, and Mike Portnoy, I mean, he comes up again, came onto the stage and introduced the band as being like, this is the band that his son is in, show them some love, and Next to None is a great progressive metal band. I hope that they put out something soon, or I guess something else. But I got this at that concert because this was when they were touring the whole Restoration thing. So they played all 3 tracks from that, which is The Darkest Light, Earthling, and Crystallized. And that was something that I could not fathom, because they played both Crystallized and Visions at that set, and both just blew me away. I was in tears. It was such a good show. I loved it so much. So yeah, this was one that I picked up at that show, and I loved it. Okay, number 11, a quintessential summer album. Now, I could have actually changed both of these albums from the Cottage album to this one, because both are very much tied to me listening to them at my cottage. So I could have put Crisis What Crisis in the summer, because I also listened to that in the summer. But this is one that I feel is, for me, a quintessential summer album. And I know some people might not necessarily agree, but that's In Absentia from Porcupine Tree. I finally learned how to pronounce it correctly. I think people are still going to tell me I'm wrong. But this album I listen to so often in the summertime, especially at the cottage, at night. I love listening to this on a summer evening and a summer night and just watching the stars and listening to this whole thing. When I first got introduced to this album, I was living up in Sudbury and I was listening to this throughout the summer that I was up there. And it's such a great album. It's one of Porcupine Tree's best albums. Not my favorite, but I see that it is a fan favorite. It has the fan favorite track of Trains on here. And I also love the track of like The Blackest Eye, The Sound of Music. But for me, it's Gravity Eyelids and Collapse the Light into Earth that are the standout tracks for this. So there's the Train Yard. And yeah, so Porcupine Trees In Absentia. All right, let's see here. Number 12. The most expensive single record that you have. So this is not from a box set or not a special edition or anything like that. The most expensive single record. And this one, again, is another one that I keep in the sleeve because of how much it was. This is Deloused in Comatorium, or however you want to pronounce it. I always just say it's Deloused. But yeah, Deloused in Comatorium from the Mars Volta. I believe this is the first pressing, or it might be, this is music on vinyl classic album, 180 gram audiophile vinyl pressing. I got this at a used record store, and this was like $80 Canadian about 4, 5, 6 years ago. Time has no meaning anymore. But yeah, this was the most I've ever spent on a single record. My cap at this point is about $60. I won't spend more on a single release more than $60 unless I love the album. But even then, about 40 is my like go into it. Anything from like, I'd say 15 to about 25, 30 is like a purchase without question. Anything above 30 is like, hold on, do I really like this? And then above a 60, it's like, okay, pump the brakes. We really have to think about this one. But this one, it took a lot of convincing for me, and I'm so glad that I finally did, even though they are re-releasing all their albums. And I think they have the box set that's available now, and then throughout this year and next year, they're slowly rolling out all the other studio records. But yeah, Deloused is still one of my favorite albums of all time, a great record, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful record. So there you go. There's the most expensive single album I've ever purchased. Okay, so let's see here. Number 13, an album you own more than once across the same format. This one I wanted to kind of specify because I think we all have more than like one copy of an album on different formats. Like I know I have multiple copies of a lot of Genesis albums across vinyl, tape, and CD, but I wanted to stick to it in just vinyl format, so I'm going with, and I do have a number of these, except I spread them out. So I have like, if I have more than one copy, I have one at the cottage, I give one to my dad. Like I have 3 copies of Tales from Topographic Oceans, but one copy's at the cottage and the other one's at my dad's place. So this is an album that I have currently in my possession that I have 3 copies of, because clearly I don't have enough. And that is the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, and Lonely Heart Club's Band. The first one I inherited from my aunt, and she has her name printed right up on the top there, Kathy McLean. If she's watching, hello. This one also has the insert here of the Lonely Heart Club's Band that you can like cut out and whatnot. I'll take it out so you can have a proper look. So there's the insert for the Sgt. Pepper himself and the Lonely Hearts Club Band. I also have it because my great uncle used to work at Capitol Records Canada. He would get a lot of very special materials. So this is just a single album. I don't have a sleeve for it or anything, but this is like a marble pressing. And I don't know exactly when it was done, but I inherited it quite a while ago. And unfortunately, it didn't come with an album sleeve, so I keep it in just a kind of a loose thing here. I do need to find a proper album sleeve. So I've got that copy of it. And finally, I have the copy that I have within my box set, the big Beatles box set. And so this is the reissued, the re-release stereo edition in vinyl format. So I have it across 3 albums, all vinyl, and there you go. All right, where are we on now? We are on question 14, a quintessential Canadian album. I wanted to show the light on a bunch of Canadian stuff, and I figured this is a great one. And so what is better than Rush? I was very tempted to put on some of the other ones that I had done on my last record tag, like Klaatu or Joel Plaskett. I wanted to do Bare Naked Ladies, but I don't currently own any Bare Naked Ladies in vinyl format, so I had to do Rush with their moving pictures, and I figured this is a quintessential Canadian record because that face is part of, it's either part of the University of Toronto campus, I think that's where these arches are from, or the old City Hall. I think it's the University of Toronto campus that these are from. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's quintessential Torontonian Canadian albums on there. And yeah, can't go wrong with that. So there's a quintessential Canadian album. All right, number 15, an album that marks a stark change in style. Originally I wanted to do Opeth, but I wanted to keep these, each question is a different band. Anyway, I decided to do a different album, which is Pink Floyd's Momentary Lapse of Reason. This is the first album without Roger Waters on it, and it is a stark contrast to the collection of albums that Pink Floyd had before this, because the last 2 albums before this was The Wall and The Final Cut. So this is a very stark change in their style, mainly because it's mainly just David Gilmour. I've grown to love this album over the years. It's really turning out to be a fantastic, fantastic album. I recognize that it is far and away from their best work, but with tracks like Signs of Life, Learning to Fly, On the Train Away, and Sorrow. On the Train Away is just a brilliant and heartfelt album, or track. So there you go. This is, I got this at a used record store, and I've really, really enjoyed it. So there you go. Yeah, A Momentary Lapse of Reason from Pink Floyd. Coming into the final few, number 17, an album or albums that you inherited from family members. Oh, there it is. Oh, wait, I skipped one. I skipped 16. 16, a feel-good album. I could have chosen so many different albums because that's my favorite kind of musical expression, are always feel-good and happy albums. So I decided to go with a French-Canadian album. This could have also fit within the French-Canadian one. And that is Harmonians album. This is their second release, and this is Le Cinq de Saison, the 5th season. Yeah, there's a whole, it's like Séon avant baston d'une 5 de saisons, which essentially is like the 5 seasons, right? So you have like the each track on here represents a different season, starting with, I think, spring, summer, fall, winter, and then finally the season of love. And it is gorgeous. If you haven't heard this one already, this is Harmonian's best work. Even though a lot of people love their last album, this one's my favorite of theirs. It's quick, it's succinct, and it's an absolute feel-good album. So if you haven't listened to this one already, please, 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 please do. Okay, now is an album that I inherited from a family member. And a lot of these albums I inherited from my family. I mean, my dad gave me most of his record collection, so, I mean, not quite half. I've definitely overtaken him in terms of like the big bulk amount of this. But I mean, a good quarter or maybe even less are his. But I wanted to go for my mom. My mom gave me a whole bunch of hers. And so I go for Pat Benatar with her album of Crimes of Passion. You can see that her name is here, Laura McLean. And so, yeah, this is one that she gave to me. She gave me all of her old albums. I ended up donating more than half, if not like 95% of them. But I still keep a few in here just to kind of honor my mom and being like, yeah, I still have a bunch of your albums if you ever wanted to take them back. And this one's still fun. You know, like there's not a whole lot of fun or not a whole lot of tracks to make me come back for more. But yeah, like Hit Me With Your Best Shot is on this one. And that's one that's, you know, enough for me to come back to it. So yeah, there you go. Pat Benatar. All right, we've got 3 more. Number 18, an album you bought solely on cover art. Now, this is the one that I probably should have mentioned when I was talking about Roger Dean, because the Grobschnitt album that I covered on my last record tag was not actually Roger Dean, and it looked like Roger Dean to me. So this is a African progressive rock band called Obasai. And I try to pronounce the actual album title, Woo Yaya, I think it is, Woo Yaya. Great cover art from Roger Dean. I mean, that is enough for me to pick it up. So this was pretty much the main reason why I bought this album. But then when I actually started spinning it, it is such a celebration of sound. It's a celebration of music. It's a celebration of life. It is all around a absolute feel-good album. And if you haven't heard Obasai by now, this is a great entry point to their musical catalog. I love this album. I spin it quite regularly. It's in my roster all the time. And of course, that Roger Dean artwork is just gorgeous. So there you go. This was an album that I bought mainly on the album artwork. And then once I started spinning it, I'm like, oh man, this is really, really good. All right, the last two, number 19, a high school flashback album. So this one's a little bit different than a nostalgic album, because this was an album that was huge when I was in high school. I remember everybody fawning over it and loving it, and I was so happy that an album like this was getting so much notoriety, because it was a very, very popular band, like one of the biggest bands at the time, doing a progressive rock album. And to this day, I'm shocked that it worked to such the extent. I mean, it worked to such an extent that they followed it up with another prog album. And some people might not necessarily agree that it's a prog album, but I think it is. And that is Green Day's American Idiot. It is a concept album. It's a rock opera. It has 2 tracks that are longer than 7 or 8 minutes, with Jesus of Suburbia and Homecoming. This has, one of the big tracks of Boulevard of Broken Dreams, as well as Wake Me Up When September Ends. This is an album that it's maybe not aged quite as well as some of their other material. Like, I found that I've actually grown to love 21st Century Breakdown a little bit more, but because that was more of a university album for me, this one is completely a high school album. I remember when this came out in grade 11 and 12 for me, and it just exploded. A lot of people were saying this is our generation's Dark Side of the Moon. They weren't 100% wrong in that, but I still come back to this album even today, and I still get a lot of enjoyment out of it. It's a beautiful album. Beautiful concept, even though it may not have aged as well as I was hoping to. All right, the final album of this, number 20, an album that tells an epic story. And I was racking my brain over which one to feature, because there are so many different albums on here that are a concept album in terms of a storyline. But in the end, I had to go for one of my favorites, and I love this album, and I love showcasing this whenever I can. That is Marillion's Brave. And this album, this actual physical copy, really holds a special place in my heart, because I got this album when I was unfortunately just living on a couch at my uncle's place in Toronto. I had maybe $50 to my name, but I was able to pick up this album when I was at Sunrise Records, when it was still open on Yonge Street and Dundas. And unfortunately, when I was staying in his basement, the basement flooded, and I had a bunch of my records on the ground, and there is quite a substantial bit of water damage that goes up to about here on the record itself. So if you look closely enough, there's this wave of this water damage that covers her mouth and her nose, which for me is a big statement and a metaphor about the album itself, if you know the storyline of this album, especially when you get to The Great Escape and Made Again. And especially with this album, where depending on where the needle drops on that fourth side, you can get one of 2 different endings. And so I love how this water damaged cover actually foreshadows the endings that could become. I mean, this whole story is about a woman who drowns in both of her social obligations and her being raised in an extremely abusive household and trying to break out of that. But because of her age, she's not allowed to, and going to the cops and pleading for them to please get her anywhere that's safe, and bringing her back home where it absolutely is not. It is heartbreaking, the story of this album, and the music on it is probably Marillion's best work. I mean, at least best work in terms of When They're With H. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant album. If you haven't heard it already, please do. A masterpiece for Marillion's music. So there you go. Marillion's Brave tells a beautiful epic tale. And there you go. There is my record tag. I hope you enjoyed. It's a little bit on the long side, so I hope you stuck with me. What are your own? I've left all the prompts down below to follow it. Please use the hashtag of, I think it's going to be Notes Record Tag 2021. It's whichever one that I used in the description there, because I want to see everybody else's. I would love to see your own take on these prompts and these questions, and yeah, I can't wait to see those. So, thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.